presidents could no longer just walk around casually. Before Kennedy's assassination, the president had a lot more freedom to just travel around Washington, D.C. without a huge protective detail. Going back to Abraham Lincoln real quick, he was known for taking nightly strolls throughout the city to just clear his mind. He also would ride his horse all alone to his cottage farther away in D.C. at the Old Soldiers' Home by himself. So he would just go on horseback rides all alone. There was actually an assassination attempt on him. The bullet went through his hat. They never found out who it was while he was riding his horse to the cottage. So
I didn't even know about that one.
Yeah, so, not safe.
Yeah, not
for presidents
safe
to
at
be
all.
walking around like this. Calvin Coolidge, when he was in office, he would walk around D.C. only accompanied by one bodyguard. So again, not a ton of protection. Yeah. This was the case for a lot of presidents. But that all stopped after Kennedy. The distance between the president and the people has really continued to grow to this day.
You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from Law and Disorder, where we dive into the world of true crime stories with memorable cases that have lasting effects for law enforcement.
Welcome to today's episode of Law and Disorder. This month, I'm sitting down with our Director of Visitor Experience, Madison Heitzenrater, to discuss the assassination of President John F. Kennedy and its greater impact on the United States Secret Service. Thanks for being here, Madison.
Thanks for having me.
All right, before we get into our discussion, why don't you set the scene for us, Madison?
Of course. So President John F. Kennedy was our 35th president here in the United States. He was the youngest person ever elected president, which is super cool. He served at the height of the Cold War, and the majority of his foreign policy concerned relations with the Soviet Union and Cuba. One really cool thing I love about him and kind of the acts that he did while he was in office is one of his first presidential acts was signing an executive order that officially started the Peace Corps, which is pretty cool. But to kind of focus on Secret Service and their role, the Secret Service has played a role in American history since its establishment in 1865. Fun fact, Abraham Lincoln actually created the Secret Service on the same day he was assassinated, which is pretty eerie.
That is very eerie,
actually. Yeah, very eerie. But however, it was only after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas, that the agency began to grow and transform into the extensive, technologically advanced and covert operation it is today. President Kennedy was shot while riding in a motorcade through Dealey Plaza. The assassination really shocked the nation and honestly the world as a whole. Kennedy was struck by 2 bullets, one in the upper back and another in the head, resulting in fatal injuries. Texas Governor John Connally, who was riding with him, was also injured. After the shooting, Kennedy was rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital, where he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested later that day and charged with the murder, but he denied the allegations. Only 2 days later, while being transferred to another jail, Oswald was shot and killed by nightclub owner Jack Ruby, further complicating this investigation. A government commission known as the Warren Commission concluded in 1964 that Oswald did act alone. However, numerous conspiracy theories have emerged over the years, questioning the findings and suggesting involvement from various groups, including the Mafia and the CIA. But we're not going to get into that today.
Fair.
We don't have time
fair.
for all that. But this assassination had a profound impact on American society and politics, leading to the increased scrutiny of government and law enforcement and sparking ongoing debates about the events surrounding that tragic day.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. One thing that we really want to cover in our discussion is the difference in security protocols for the Secret Service between 1963 and 2024, and the public perception of those security protocols as well. So think about what the security protocols were back in 1963 when Kennedy was president. There had been other assassination attempts on previous presidents and some successful assassinations as well. But Kennedy's is the one that really made a big difference for the modern presidency. So can you detail some specific changes that were made to Secret Service's procedures or even the policies after the assassination?
For starters, open limousines are out. No longer going to be doing that.
Darn.
Yeah, after the Kennedy assassination, that was kind of a game changer for the way motorcades would work. And Secret Service really began taking a more aggressive approach to its advancement work when going to locations where a president would be visiting. One change was how long these protectees would receive service. It would now last for life after this. In response to Kennedy's assassination, Congress enacted legislation in 1963 to provide continued protection for Jackie Kennedy and her children for 2 more years, despite the fact that they were no longer living in the White House. This type of extended protection was unprecedented for former first families, as prior to Kennedy's assassination, presidential families did not receive extended security after leaving office. So Jackie and her kids were kind of the trendsetter after this event. And then in 1965, Congress further expanded protections for former presidents and first ladies by enacting a law that provided lifetime security for former presidents and their spouses, as well as for their minor children until they turned 16, unless they opted out of that protection. But then come 2012, so many years later, President Obama signs the Former President's Protection Act of 2012, which overturned a previous law that restricted Secret Service protection. So with this new legislation in place, former President George W. Bush and all future former presidents are now guaranteed Secret Service protection for life. Additionally, this law ensures that the children of former presidents will receive protection until they turn 16.
Very interesting. I wonder why they cut it off at 16.
I'm not sure. I don't know, because I would think 18.
Yeah, I would also think 18.
Right. But I'm not sure why.
I'm not really sure either. That's just it's interesting how we choose those ages. But
right,
anyway.
Exactly. Well, and I mean, for Jackie Kennedy and her kids to kind of be the trendsetters for this, essentially, because obviously there was such a threat on their family. And I mean, chaos, I'm sure.
And their children were very young.
Exactly.
Like, way younger than any other president's children have ever been in the White House. So
yeah, they were definitely kind of the trendsetters. Another big change that came out as a result of Kennedy's assassination was presidents could no longer just walk around casually. Before Kennedy's assassination, the president had a lot more freedom to just travel around Washington, D.C. without a huge protective detail. Going back to Abraham Lincoln real quick, he was known for taking nightly strolls throughout the city to just clear his mind. He also would ride his horse all alone to his cottage farther away in D.C. at the Old Soldiers' Home by himself. So he would just go on horseback rides all alone. There was actually an assassination attempt on him. The bullet went through his hat. They never found out who it was while he was riding his horse to the cottage. So
I didn't even know about that one.
Yeah, so not safe.
Not
for presidents
safe at
to be
all.
walking around like this. Calvin Coolidge, when he was in office, he would walk around D.C. only accompanied by one bodyguard. So again, not a ton of protection. Yeah. This was the case for a lot of presidents. But that all stopped after Kennedy. The distance between the president and the people has really continued to grow to this day. Another thing I'll mention is just, again, larger United States Secret Service protection. So over the years, the service has established different teams. So you have counter sniper units now. You have assault teams. You have surveillance units. Advanced teams are crucial in each state when the president is going to visit somewhere. To put it in perspective, when Teddy Roosevelt was in office, he had only 2 officers posted at the White House at a time.
That feels like not enough.
Right. 2 officers.
Really feels like not enough.
Right. But then today, if you go over, there's well over 100 officers at the White House.
And
posted.
especially because Theodore Roosevelt was eventually shot while giving a campaign speech. So for him to only have 2 officers at the White House is not enough officers.
Right. Well, and he became vice president after McKinley was successfully assassinated in 1901. He goes into office, only 2 Secret Service for him at that time, at once posted at the White House, and later an assassination attempt on his life as well. So to kind of give you a little bit more of those numbers, the Secret Service really began staffing up. There were just 28 agents on the ground in Dallas, Texas in 1963, 28. And the agent's budget was $5.5 million at that time. To put it in perspective for today, a president they may have the budget of more than $3 billion for Secret Service. I believe in 2024, it's $3 billion.
That's crazy.
And they have now approximately 3,200 special agents and 1,300 uniformed division officers. So, and more plus that.
A drastic increase. Honestly, after what happened with Kennedy's assassination, it seems like that was a valid response.
Right.
And then to get a little bit further into it, technological advancements were made for Secret Service in the wake of Kennedy's assassination. How did advancements in technology and communication following the assassination impact the way that Secret Service operates today?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, open-top limousines are out. We're no longer doing that after the Kennedy assassination. Kennedy was waving to spectators, again, from the back of an open-top vehicle. It was a midnight blue 1961 Lincoln 4-door convertible. But today, the presidential limo is known as the Beast, and it is a high-tech vehicle designed to protect the president from an array of possible threats. So to kind of compare, JFK's limo was sleek and stylish, so it looked good. It looked the part. It was a Lincoln, but it lacked a lot of security features. So besides its removable top, the car had 2 radio telephones, flashing red lights, 4 retractable steps for Secret Service agents to stand on, and a hydraulic rear seat that could be raised by 10.5 inches to lift the president up.
Like the Pope Mobile.
Exactly. Heighten him up and people could get a better look. But then when you compare that to the Beast, the limo today, it's highly sophisticated. So it features 8-inch thick armor plates designed to withstand an IED blast, 5-inch multi-layer windows that make the weight of the doors comparable to those of a 757 airplane. It has a night vision system, onboard systems for fresh oxygen, and additionally, the trunk contains a blood bank stocked with the president's blood type. And I mean, you and I work here in DC. Yeah. You've been in traffic and motorcades go by. When it's for the president, it's an entire fleet of vehicles. Yeah. When you compare that to Kennedy, when you see footage of Kennedy going through Dealey Plaza in Texas, there's some motorcycles in front of him. Yeah. Like it's the motorcade that you see today just for the president to go a very short distance in DC is huge with ambulances, multiple limousines. You're also going to have MPD, Metropolitan Police Department, helping that as well. You'll have Secret Service on bikes also patrolling. So, I mean, yeah, it's just a huge effort.
So many streets are closed off.
Oh, yeah.
Like traffic is diverted away from where the motorcade is going, specifically because they know a motorcade is going through. So it's very different. You'd barely even see the motorcades unless you're out on foot in the city.
Right.
I would think you wouldn't really see it from a car.
Yeah. I mean, it's just such a process now for motorcades, which understandable. Again, you don't want anything like the Kennedy assassination ever happen again. So you have the Beast limousine plus a whole parade essentially of other vehicles to keep the president safe and ensure things don't go wrong.
Yeah. And that motorcade type of strategy is effectively a protection strategy for the president. So how have these strategies for protecting presidents evolved since JFK's time, especially in terms of public engagements?
I think throughout history, presidents have wanted to seem personable and approachable, and a way to do this was to be easily accessible for citizens. Whether it was Abraham Lincoln allowing anyone to walk in the White House for a meeting with him without being screened. I mean, just again, not a very safe practice.
Would never think of that today.
Right. Or it was William McKinley meeting folks in a greeting line in Buffalo, New York when he was attending the Pan American Exposition and just standing in a greeting line shaking everyone's hands. Presidents want to come across as approachable. And there have just been so many examples of this with numerous presidents, including Kennedy, who insisted on riding in an open-top vehicle, even though there are always security concerns. Public engagement has had to change, whether the presidents like it or not. You no longer see presidents, again, riding in open-top vehicles. They're going to be inside of that car. They're not standing in long greeting lines for the public unless it's a very highly secured area that's in a lockdown space. So unless you're on the White House lawn, where obviously everyone has been screened, you have background checks, things like that. The distance between the public and the president just continues to grow. For any sort of public engagement today, and depending on the location, obviously, people have to go through background checks, magnetometer machines, sometimes canine searches. So an advanced team from Secret Service is going to be planning weeks in advance the layout and security protocols for locations. They're working with state and local police, other federal agencies. And at public events, now there can be well over 100 Secret Service agents on the premise at one time. And when you compare that to Kennedy, again, looking at his ride through Dealey Plaza, 28 agents, and that was it.
Yeah, it's drastically different. And you mentioned just then that they're working with local law enforcement and trying to come up with a security plan to protect the president when he's away from the White House, away from Washington, D.C. So what improvements were made in terms of coordination with other agencies after the assassination, especially regarding intelligence and threat assessment?
To ensure the safety of the president and other protectees, the Secret Service relies on the support of various federal, state, and local agencies, honestly, on a daily basis. The Secret Service Uniform Division, along with the Metropolitan Police Department and United States Park Police, monitor and patrol the areas surrounding the White House daily. They're constantly working together. Additionally, the Secret Service regularly collaborates with experts from other agencies to employ the most advanced security strategies. So You also have the military. They work with the military, which is pretty cool. They assist by providing explosive ordnance disposal teams and communication support. When the president travels, you have a dedicated advance team of Secret Service agents who are working closely, again, with those local law enforcement agencies, state authorities, and public safety officials to really coordinate and implement necessary security measures.
And then to talk about those kind of security measures, looking back at Kennedy's assassination, like, they obviously saw that there were issues with those security measures and we needed to take action. What was the immediate response from the federal government after Kennedy's assassination?
Yeah, so we have the establishment of the Warren Commission, which really was a direct result of Jack Ruby's murder of Lee Harvey Oswald 2 days after Kennedy's assassination on November 24th, 1963. Jack Ruby's murder of Oswald was actually broadcast live on national television.
Which is very scary.
Very scary. So many people witnessed it. And again, I think that's what really propelled the Warren Commission needing to be created. The absence of a public investigation into the errors made by Dallas police, who had unfortunately prematurely declared the case closed, led to growing public skepticism. And President Lyndon B. Johnson, who had just taken over, he's a new president, he's acutely aware of the potential damage to his presidency with everything that's going on, with all this chaos. So with both assassinations, that being Kennedy and Oswald, having occurred in his home state, and the Texas authorities discrediting and widely criticized for their handling of the case, Johnson really fears a political fallout for himself. And so he consults with some key figures, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation's director, J. Edgar Hoover. Johnson decides to create a presidential commission of inquiry through an executive order on November 29th, 1963. So this is happening very quickly, just a couple of days after the assassination.
Within a week.
Yeah. This move really allowed him to prevent an independent investigation by Congress and avoid assigning the case to Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, so President Kennedy's brother, who was clearly personally affected by this assassination.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine the emotion he's going, their whole family.
Yeah.
I mean, but yeah, for
and
Bobby.
I mean, if you had just a regular police department, you wouldn't put someone related to a victim of a case on that investigation.
Exactly.
Why would you want to do that with such a huge case?
Right.
Everybody's eyes internationally are on the handling of the JFK assassination. Right. Like, why would you put him under even more pressure?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the eyes of the world are really watching how our government and how law enforcement are going to react.
Handles it. And you've put his brother in charge of the investigation who's grieving. That would just be a very interesting situation. Best to avoid that. Yeah.
Right. But really, from the beginning, the commission considered its mandate to conduct a thorough and independent investigation. The commission reviewed reports by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, United States Secret Service, Department of State, and the Attorney General of Texas, and then requested additional information from federal agencies, congressional committees, state and local experts. A lot of these agencies had taken thousands of witness reports from that day, from all the people, from all the bystanders who were watching the event as well.
I mean, the Zapruder film, which has been the main kind of primary source from that day, was filmed by a civilian.
Right. They had so much to collect from the people who were there, who, again, not getting into conspiracy theories because there's such a long road you can go down with that. But, you have the people who say that they saw a puff of smoke coming from a line of bushes, indicating there may have been a second shooter. And so you're just having to take all these witness statements into account as well for this investigation. But the commission held hearings and took the testimony of 552 witnesses themselves. The FBI actually ran over 1,000 interviews, if I remember correctly. But on several occasions, the commission went to Dallas to visit the scene of the assassination and other places. But their official report was that Oswald had acted alone in this assassination attempt.
And then, kind of to wrap up here, we want to talk about the legacy that's lasted of JFK's assassination. So in what ways do you think that John F. Kennedy's assassination still influences Secret Service operations and presidential security today?
First, starting with Secret Service, I think Secret Service, they've learned valuable lessons from each failed and successful assassination attempt throughout U.S. history. But with JFK's, it really was a game changer, leading to numerous changes, not only with the service's protocols, but also our nation's laws in regard to who receives protection and for how long. It just quickly led to changes in things as simple as motorcades and traveling. Secret Service's budget would change. You'd have more agents hired on and trained and different divisions created. And the technology is changing. So many changes came about and laws came about because of Kennedy's assassination. I think also Kennedy is heavily romanticized in pop culture in the United States. Our parents and our grandparents can remember where they were when it happened. And I think that's why this event is so impactful and relevant today, all these years later. I think, there's been movies about Kennedy, about Jackie Kennedy. And I think he's just such a, again, highly romanticized figure in United States history.
And you think about it, he was one of the first presidents from like the very beginning of his campaign through his assassination that was on TV.
Right.
Like all of his presidency was seen visually as opposed to just hearing it on the radio.
Exactly. And his assassination, I mean, it was the fourth successful assassination in U.S. history. You have Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and then Kennedy. And this one was filmed. So it's also just going to have such a larger impact because people are seeing it around the world. So, people around the country and around the globe saw the footage, not only of the bullet striking the president, but also the grief that the bystanders were experiencing. News coverage of women and children crying and the chaos.
And the news coverage of the assassination began immediately.
Right.
Like you have Walter Cronkite coming onto the television and saying, like, to the American people, breaking news.
Right.
It interrupted programming and saying that the president was assassinated.
Right.
Like, that's something that the previous 3 successful assassinations, there wasn't immediate news. You found out the president was assassinated whenever the news made it to your local newspaper.
Exactly.
Like, which could be days, it could be weeks.
Right, right. And I think because the Kennedy assassination was so heavily publicized so quickly, that also added pressure onto Secret Service to really take a step back, look at what happened, and figure out how best to react to the situation and what changes needed to be implemented. I'm sure, procedures that day were heavily scrutinized by the public. And so it really just, again, propelled the need for change. Every assassination attempt in United States history has been a learning experience for Secret Service. And so I think this one in particular really was the game changer for what we see today as the modern service.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Madison, for sitting down and talking with me today for this very special episode of Law and Disorder. If you find yourselves in the DC area, come visit us at the National Law Enforcement Museum and learn more about the stories like this for yourself. So thank you so much.
Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.